So I'll talk about different ways you can be in control. So first I'll give a little introduction. So I'll explain the general idea I want to explain. Then I'll link this to other anarchist or non-anarchist theories. And I'll make some instruction on how we can be in control in different ways. Then I'll try to formalize this by using a model of Mesarovic's, then generalize this model, then apply this to several models of control. So, in general, people would like to have control over their life. They don't like the feeling that they're being controlled, and it's also like in cybernetic systems. It's the thing that a system wants to reach its goals, just as by creating a certain output, which influences the input. But often it's assumed that, like, if you want control over your life, you should control others. So, if you don't want any control to happen, you should just remain passive and you can't really do it something. But I don't really believe that. I think there are different kind of ways that you can try to reach control for yourself. You can really try to control everything, like every little detail, the whole world around you, want it to be like you want. Or you can try to find like synergies with with the people around you. Move to a better environment that reach your goals more. Like is finding synergies. I see it as like that people can. There are like multiple paths people can take to reach their goal of, or to live the life they want to be. Now you can agree upon that you both take a path which is beneficial for both of you. A bit metaphor to explain this is the rain. So most people don't like rain, but there are like two ways you can handle it. You could try to control the weather, just make sure it doesn't rain anymore. Or you could build a shelter, move to a shelter, so that the rain doesn't hurt you anymore. And a bit more realistic example, because we still can't control the weather, is agriculture. Like the traditional agriculture model is like monoculture. So you're just taking one crop, you're destroying all the other crops, all the other plants, all the other animals which are on your fields. Then you have to put fertilizer on it because your soil doesn't have nutrients anymore. That's like trying to really control everything, while the idea of permaculture is that you look at it as an ecosystem and you're just observing like how the ecosystem works. Then you're trying to put it in a way so that it's also beneficial for you. It also gives something back for you. Trying to find like a synergy or something like that. So I'm going to relate it a bit to other theories. One is a theory about antifragility. So the idea is that a system is antifragile if it becomes better after shocks. So the idea is to not just really predetermine how the system should behave exactly, but just make it more antifragile so that it's more resilient, more strong. It's a bit related to anarchist ideas about that. For example, that conflict isn't necessarily bad. It might be good to get out of the status quo. Like diversity, fragmentativeness can also be a value that you're not like in a rigid structure. So another thing like where anarchists often don't agree about is about democracy. Well, it's about different levels. It's what often even anarchists assume is what Peter Gelderloos calls the wristboard mentality. So he says it's like the assumption that contact between people who are different, it must result in a missionary relationship, so one converting the other. While he says, yeah, it's not necessary. It's necessary. You could have like a mutual influence. So it's a bit. He says it's a Western idea that we want to see the world as a risk board. And so you have two kind of camps in the anarchist movements. One are like what he calls organizationists. So it's a bit simplistic to say, but because of this assumption, they try to convert other people. So these are, for example, platformists. They're trying to. They really want to make like a big platform where everybody agrees on which way to go, and then like anarcho-syndicalism from some more historical movement, they also often use that, and then also like in today's today you see it often in like these big action camps where they're trying to reach a consensus with like hundreds of people. And you have like on the other side you have like the insurrectionalists. So insurrectionalism is the idea that you try to go to an insurrection, or do today work towards an insurrection. So it's also a kind of simplistic, but they're more like trying to avoid contact because of these assumptions, and so they're more like organizing on the basis of affinity. So they're searching people with the same ideas, with the same with the same way of acting, and work with them. And then you also have the idea of a diversity of tactics, where this is the idea that it's just everybody has different kind of tactics to go to somewhere, and you don't really necessarily have to agree on the tactics. It's those tactics that can reinforce each other. And anarcho-individualism is a bit also in this camp. So we're working on a more individualistic base. Here there's a bit of anarcho-individualists, at least two. So another idea is that power doesn't need to be like in a central body or one central person or whatever on the top. So it's often not because you feel like you're being controlled that you could really point out somebody or someone who is controlling you. So one of the ideas is like that power is like certain norms you can't avoid, for example, like gender norms or other kind of norms. So McLuhan speaks about this in his paper on social power. He really defines power as the alignment of norms. So he says like people try to get control or reach control by force, by coercion, or by influence. Times those two types. And then, but that only works when there's like social power. So when the environment is aligned to the same, what he calls reference values. And then it's difficult for a person who has other reference values to think differently or act differently. Another thing he says is that he doesn't say it in this way, I guess, but that paternalism and compassion are actually two sides of the same coin. So you could try to punish or you could reward to get where you want, but both are like trying to get a person to do what you want, and like paternalism, like giving homeless people food might look good, but on the other hand you make them dependent on you. So another thing related to this is about capitalism, that you can't really opt out of capitalism. So what Gelderloos calls is the myth conflating consumption with agency. So often people think that they can change things by consuming differently or things like that, but capitalism just uses this to find another niche for things. And then another idea is an idea of anarcho-individualists, is that like authority is like a social relationship, a certain rule you should obey. So what it says, like the master is actually as enslaved as the slaves. He also should comply to certain expectations. So yeah. And then what Stirner says is, he says like often you have like an organization which comes up because there's like a common goal and people act for this common goal. But then as the organization grows, it just becomes like an organization for the organization. The common goal is forgotten, maybe it's already reached. You get like in a rigid structure, and he says like it's the same with thought. So how ideology comes into place. You have like first you have like free thinkers, and they're often going against certain norms or certain way of thinking. But then they also become more rigid and becomes ideology or dogma itself. Another thing is about what's important to take into account is like alienation. So how I see it is that like you have emotions and they're like certain. You could see it as a compass to know like what's good and bad for you. Like you're happy when you find food because that's good for you. But more and more, because the world is more and more changing, this compass doesn't work really anymore, and we start to really consume emotions. So the most clear example is like taking drugs. You just take it to feel happy, but it's not truly related to anything real anymore, to any reward or something that should give you positive feedback. So, but I think it's more broad than just the drugs. I think in general, often people are like addicted to this system, to capitalism or to whatever. It's because like it's actually bad for them, but they just don't see it and they look as if we're in the best system ever, or they're like agree that it's bad, but they see like I can't do anything about it. It's just the way it is. So it's a bit like we're living in like a golden cage where we seem to like get everything we want, but we're not really free to do as we want. And then another thing is that this like control is like everywhere on different interrelating facets. So it's not like just economic oppression, but you also have like gender oppression, racism, all these things. And this is a bit in opposition to what Marxists think. So there are ideas that you have the basis like the form of economic organization, the mode of production. So this economic oppression, all the other oppressions come forth of it. So then you have the social phenomena, which are hashing the superstructure. And then like what Gelderloos says in his little paper on Rise of Reich is he tries to debunk this a little bit, and one of his arguments is that you saw in hunter-gatherers that there are also like hierarchical hunter-gatherers. Like you had hunter-gatherers with there were divisions based on gender or based on age. So you had the elders who had more to say. On the other hand, you also had egalitarian hunter-gatherers, and also when they became agriculture, they stayed egalitarian. So you couldn't say like agriculture made a hierarchy happen. But and what he sees like in these egalitarian cultures, there was no hierarchy because there was an active opposition to it. So it says like that you can see that hierarchy arises in every system where there's no organization to prevent it. But on the other hand, it's not that simple because technology, for example, agriculture, can give a positive feedback to reinforce hierarchies, to like military power or stuff like that, oppress egalitarian cultures.
How does a positive feedback work?
For like, he says like so you had this you had already sexism and ageism in these societies, and then because for example you got property, and then you had like really the paternalistic structure of property rights, and it's become like the male at power of the goods, and then there was like more Also, military expansion, that these hierarchical structures were military more advanced, so they could suppress other cities which were more like utilitarian. Some things like that.
But what's the level of technology?
It's I see agriculture as a certain kind of technology. I think technology can. I think it can give a positive. It depends on the technology which kind of positive feedback it gives. I think. So you could have like a technology. It could give positive feedback for hierarchy, but it could also give positive feedback for.
It can increase the differences in power level by giving extra powers to the one at the top, while the one at the bottom don't have access to the technology.
With these, so often revolutionaries still thinking, they either think that by changing the material conditions, you could also change the ideas and like the social structure, or the other way around, by changing the ideas, automatically the structures would diminish. So it's a bit the discussion, it's a bit the distinction between building up versus attacking, they call. So building up is like trying to create alternative communities, alternative ways of living, while attacking is like trying to demolish the structures that are there. And what Gelderloos also says, that it's a bit like a false distinction, because by like attacking, you're creating a space where people can experiment with other kinds of living. It's not, you can't really do it in this today's system, because it's already too corrupt or something. And on the other hand, if you're like the problem with building up is often that capitalism is pretty good in recuperating things. So an example of this is like biofuels. They emerge just from some people who used the oils they didn't use anymore and stuff like that to for their cars. But then there were like agro businesses who saw interest in it, and then they started to use whole kind of lands to just make crops just for fuels, and then the people's food were under attack. Like they destroyed rainforests, they put people out of their lands. But on the other hand, if you're like building a real alternative which isn't being able to being recuperated by some hierarchical organization, you're automatically it automatically will feel attack, and it will go against it. Another idea, anarchist principle, is that the aims and the methods should be aligned. So it's a bit opposed on the idea that the end justifies the means. So like for example, if you want to destroy the state, you can't really you can't do it by voting or by playing the political games. And so this is expressed in what they call prefigurative politics. So the idea is to already put the society you want, how you want it to be, to put it already into practice today. So to already act according to your ideas and how you want things to be. An example of this is direct action. So that's the idea that you directly act against something that oppresses your, instead of like, for example, asking your oppressor to stop oppressing you. So you just directly act, and you could also, in general, directly act instead of working with representatives, which one. This is a bit related to discussions about intentionality, which, like Francis said something in this direction, like that. You could see the direction an agent is going when it's not disturbed by things it couldn't anticipate on. That this is kind of the goal of the agent. So, for example, a bacteria it's just chemical processes, but it moves towards a food where there's like more food for him. You could say he has the goal to have more food. The problem is, of course, it's like what's anticipated, what's not, what's the natural way of going. You're always influenced by your environment, and it's not always that simple to get a clear line on this. Now I'm going to structure it a bit. So I would say there are like different ways you could try to get control. You could work locally, so just try to locally change things, or you could work locally. So think more in a way of like, I want to change the whole system, and how you want to do that. And then it also on how you're going to do it, so on what you're going to adapt. You could try to just adapt your links. So you could say, so if you're looking to a network structure, you could say that's like moving to a different environment. Or you could try to really change the goals of the neighbors, impose them a certain goal which is aligned with your goals. Or you could change the methods or like the sub-goals of your neighbors. So you could say that's like what I said, like these different paths and feel certain alignment. But then again, the question is a bit like, yeah, what's sub-goal, what's really goal, what's like the core and what's not subjective. So what's natural, what's not natural. Right. So and what I said, like that, it's more methods and aims should be aligned. So these distinctions aren't always that clear. So now I'll try to formalize this idea. I'll use the model of Mesarovic, and then I'll generalize this model. So its idea is that you have like
Look for chalk or?
no, a stick. So the idea is you have like you have like a supreme control system. You have like one controller at the top who wants to control a certain process by controlling some ephemeral control systems. So the way he does that is by sending some control inputs to these ephemeral control systems, and which input he sends, it also depends on the feedback he has gotten back from those systems. So those systems they try to control a certain process, and how they try it depends on what they've gotten from this controller and from the feedback it has gotten back from these feedback systems, from this process. And then this process, it works by it has certain environmental inputs and then also these control inputs, and then it creates certain outputs. And then it looks whether so it sends feedback back to say like whether this output is as wanted. So it takes all its inputs and then the output that sends to create the feedback. And then the same goes for the ephemeral control systems. So you have it takes everything it's gotten in, so the coordination from both the feedback sent from the process, and then what it has created, so the control input for the process, and then it creates feedback back to the control system. So that's its model, but it's actually pretty easy to generalize it to like not just this hierarchical structure, but in general a network structure. So the idea is you have so an agent still gets like certain control input from other agents, and it will send feedback back to them, and it also gets feedback from agents where it has sent controlled. And these control inputs, it could also just come from the environment. So I just put it in a general box, and then these control outputs, it could just be output to not just to an agent, but just to the environment, let's say. And then, so how it works is, first it gets all these inputs, so control and feedback, and it creates a control input out of it, and then it uses all these things to create a feedback back to the agents that's in control from. So, and then he also defines coordinability. I'll immediately define it in terms of this general model. And then but first we should prepare some stuff for it. So first he splits these function into like what he calls a decision unit and an implementer. So first you use this and you set it to an xy, and you could see it as a decision problem. So an xy is solution of, so for each of these values there's a decision problem defined, and xy is solution of this decision problem if the function maps to that xy. And then this solution is implemented by this implementer function to send the coordination input. And then it's just a little definition. So x is solution of a decision problem D. We define it as pxd. So first I'll define coordinability. Mesarovic also only defines it when there's no feedback. So it's a lot easier. So, and it defines it basically as when all the agents, their decision problem has a solution xy. And we only need to say that there exists an x, because we can construct these CYs out of this implementer function, which for now, so the feedback doesn't work anymore, so the implementer is just a mapping from xy to ci plus. And then he also, so that's what he calls, what I call internal coordinability, so that the agents itself are controlled. But then he also defines it relative to an overall decision problem. So basically it says that so there should be an internal coordinability, but these x's, they should also be a solution of a general decision problem that's given. And well, so these x's are maps into an output function, and these outputs should be a solution of this decision problem. With feedback, thing is, so you can define it in terms of decision problem, but you can also just define it in terms of these equalities. So with feedback, so in terms of the decision problem, you still have the same, like that xy is a solution of the decision problem. Now the decision problem depends on these both these variables, and but because this feedback is, we can't just construct the feedback out of this x. So we should also say that the feedback is remains so is equal to that one. So it's like a kind of a steady state. It doesn't change anymore. And then this ci is simply we can get it out of these functions. But we could also just leave the decision problem all away. So then we get that these equations should be fulfilled. So you could see it as kind of a steady state where the coordination input it sends, it doesn't change anymore. So now I'll apply it to the theory of controllability. So the idea here is that they try to control the whole network. So every node has a certain value xi, and they want to put that one into a certain state. So they try to control it, and they do it by sending like environmental input in this model. So by sending certain values to this, certain nodes. So the model is that the xy's are updated by adding the multiplication with the link weights multiplicated with the values of their neighbors, and then also for the same for the environmental inputs. So it's link weights between these and then with environmental. I also assume that AII is 1, so there's also an XI in there. So I really get like there's something added to XI every time. So the idea is controllability is to look how many nodes you should control. So the minimal set of nodes you should control to control the network. You could define it as controllability that every state you want the system to be in, it can be reached. So for all C that's or C's or X's, there exists some environmental inputs so that CI plus is like reached. It's a bit. They use a little bit kind of another definition in the theory of controllability. They say, like I say, it should reach the steady state, so it should reach the state and then remain in it. While they say the state should just be reached and then after one time step it's already in another state. I think it's a bit not strong enough because like okay, if like in 1 millisecond your system is in your desired state, you're not really a lot with it. So on the other hand, if you define internal coordinability in this system, it means that there exists a certain C and U such that this state is so it's in a steady state, just that it's there backwards. But you can also define controllability in terms of relative to decision problems. So it means that actually it's true for all decision problems. So you could say for all x's or for all subsets of x, it's kind of the same. So we say that there exists. So for all decision problems, there should exist. So C and U is that so there is internal coordinability, but the decision problem is also met. So there is controllability if if this one is true, so that means this formula should be met, so it's not shouldn't get like changed every step. So actually in this formula we could just put away the xi's on both sides because they're on both sides, and then we get this formula where here I should be different than G, and then so these xi's should we want them to be at a certain state which we define. So then actually this is reached if this, which we could just define as just one environmental input sent to G, that this one is equal to minus this one. So basically we should like control all the nodes in our network except for the special cases where that's one is 0, which you don't control anything. So basically this is pretty difficult to reach because we really have to control all nodes. So in the theory of controllability has another result, but as I said, it's because they don't want it to be in a steady state, but just at one moment be there. Another theory is about self-organized control. So it's based on what I call it self-organized control. It's based on the theory about neural networks, about perception learning, more specifically. So the idea it's based on the model from above. It's pretty similar, but now the link weights. So here the link weights were fixed. Now the idea is that you can change the link weights, and X3 will change the link weights so that it so that the link weights behave as he wants. Well, so that the system behaves as it wants. So I'll see the link weights as feedback signal from X3 or Xi. So that's you could say it's the idea of adapting your links, moving to a different environment. So the idea here is so the XYs which are where so each agent wants the XYs to reach its reference value, and it's how it's changed. It's by the coordination input is received from its neighbors is added to it, and then these coordination inputs are constructed by multiplying the link weight with x. So and the link weight is the feedback. So it's this formula. And then the feedback it's generated by adding this sum. So the idea is if xy is smaller than its reference value, so if it's too small, then the feedback will increase, so that the CGY will increase, so that xy will become bigger. Well, but you also multiply with xg, because if xg is negative, you want to it to become smaller, and also the bigger your xg is, the more it's like an agent with more influence, so you want it to change more. Now to put it into this model of Mesarovic, we should check whether all these things are really in or in the set we want. So to have this, whether it's really from this form. So xy we consider it as an output value, but what we should also do is we kind of send back our xi to ourselves, so it's also in our input. So so you could say like an agent has a memory, he still knows what he has done one step before. And then this is also coordination input, and also this is coordination output, and then it has feedback constructed from feedback signal and a coordination input signal. And then here we see like this one is for the feedback we also have a loop back, so it has a memory. And xy is for the feedback it can be in CI plus, and then but the problem is xg normally an agent doesn't really know how xg looks, but we use this formula to like kind of guess it by so it's xg is equal to this one. We perform a step before or something, so it might not be completely accurate. And this one behaves as we want. So as there coordinability, then these equations should apply. Then so this sum should be 0. This should apply, and then we to feedback. So these the sum added should also be 0. So the last formula, there are two possibilities for which this is true. If all the xg's are 0, but it's kind of a case we don't really want. It's basically where you can't really control because you don't get really information from your neighbors, and then you can't really do anything. Or if your xi is equal to your reference value, and then so we can see whether the other formulas are true. So we put here we put the R y in, and then we add this to this sum. So then we should have this one, and we can make sure this one is true by if all our g's would be 0, then it's fine. While if and just if there is an okay for which is not 0, we can take FEP, we move everything else to the other sides, and then we divide by the OK, so we kind of renormalize, and then this formula is fine. So we find that we can have coordinability. Of course, under the assumption that this f can have every value, so it might be that it should often like a link weight should be positive or between 0 and 1, and it depends on the kind of system you're working with whether it applies or not. And another point is that okay, there is coordinability, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this coordinability will be reached. It doesn't say anything about that. Whether it really whether these xy's will really get to this reference value. It could be that there's like maybe if this alpha is too big, there will really make jumps and grow above and below the reference value, things like that. Then the third example, or like the third theory I will apply, is the theory about perceptual control theory. I'll explain that and I'll modify it. So the idea is that a certain agent will try to control a perception, so that's the xi. But the problem is that there are also other agents which will try to control it, and they will want it to be on another reference value. So this perception is just constructed by the sum of all the output values all these agents sense, and then an agent will try to control it by like sending a bigger output if xi isn't big enough yet, and sending a lower output when it's too big. And then in this kind of model, you'll kind of majority rule or like a consensus rule will be reached. So this perception, it will be like the kind of like the mean of all these reference values. And then so you could see this like in a model. It's used in a model of like social power. That's if like everyone else around you has the same reference value, you can't really. The idea is also you can't really reach your reference value, and then the idea is also that you don't really just try to control one perception. There are like a lot of perceptions you try to control, and you have like a hierarchy of perceptions. And if like one system can't reach control, it will get perturbed and will change its reference value, so that this reference value will be changed to apply to this majority rule. Now I'll modify this theory to try to make a model where an agent tries to get control by influencing its neighbors, so it's CGYs. So we want the model to look kind of the same as perceptual control theory model. So we make the assumption that we know that the control an agent sends to you, it's the previous control multiplied with the feedback it has received, and then that the xy's constructed are the sum of all the controls you get, and then we send this feedback back to the agent. So if your xy is too small, the feedback will be positive. So this the control input will increase, so the xy will increase. And you can see that's pretty similar to this one. And then, but there's a little bit of problem of this model is that we make like a lot of assumptions that we know how the coordination input of our neighbors is constructed, and that it has a specific form which usually works as we want. So it's a bit of a a lot of big assumptions. So I want to try to generalize and assume we don't really know how those coordination inputs are constructed. We don't even know how our xy's are constructed. We just know it's a function of all the coordination inputs we got. And then we can send the feedback depending on the correlation we see between the feedback and our xy's. So if we see the feedback we've sent before, and then we get a bigger xi back, then what we do is using this formula. So if our xy is too small, our feedback will increase so that your xy will increase. And like the other way around, if we see that the feedback we've sent our xi becomes, if it's higher, it becomes smaller, then we use the minus, so that if our xy is too big, if our xy is too big, then this will increase, so our xy will decrease. Of course, it could be that it's not just always the same in the system, and it changes all the time, but this is the way how you try to reach control. But still, it still kind of makes the assumption that our aims and our methods are really separated, so our feedback and the coordination we've sent are separated, which is why this model works, which I'll show here. So it's difficult to show here whether there's coordinability or not, because we just have a general function, so we can't really say anything about it. So I'll say it in this model. So in this model, these equalities hold when our feedback is if our feedback is meant, and if our feedback should be 0, so put it away. So it holds when this is this holds when our reference value is equal to our xy, and then this sum or xi should be the sum to our reference value, should be the sum. So and it's pretty easy to just choose our CGYs, just that this condition is fulfilled. So really see because of this separation of feedback and coordination is a bit strange that we can just choose our coordination like whatever we want. So in conclusion, all these examples in our model of global versus local control. So first to reach global control, we had first our model of controllability. So there the goal was really to adapt the goals of all the agents, because you wanted these xy's to reach a certain value, so you wanted them to go into a specific direction, and if you assume direction is goal, you say you wanted them to reach adapt their goals. And we saw it was pretty difficult to get there because you had to control all the nodes. Another example of global control is the paper about emergent control, where they try to adapt the local rules of a system to reach a global goal they have set. Then, on the other hand, local control, first you have the example of self-organized control, where we try to adapt links. So based to the model based on neural network. We saw that there was coordinability reached. Well, there was coordinability, whether it's reached or not is known. And then we also modified the perceptual control theory to make a model where an agent tries to adapt the methods of other agents. And then we saw that there was coordinability, but we had a lot of assumptions. For example, the goals and methods were separated, just as maybe it's not really a realistic model. So that was it. Thanks you, and these are some references.
In terms of your conclusion about getting global control from emergent control of local, implementing local, basic simple local rules to get emergent control on a global level, what types of, have you looked at like any specific policies or attempts of that type of that type of economic system that would, where you would get that type of activity?
Yeah, it's also difficult to really like formalize this idea because it depends really on the situation.
Wasn't democracy meant to be that kind of distributed?
Sorry?
Wasn't democracy what?
Or
Like
like a direct democracy?
Not just democracy, but you have, like local. You have your vote.
It's not
produced locally and it comes.
No, it's the other way around. I think democracy. How they want democracy to be is like theoretically that the local people they decide what's the global goal. While immersion, in the paper of about immersion control, how they define is that okay, it's more from an engineering kind of philosophy that you want a certain system to reach a certain goal, and now you try to adapt these local rules so that it reaches these goals. It might also be used by politicians maybe to like more.
But here you have defined control where the goals are given, but I think the simplification in things like perceptual control theory and in neural networks is that the goal is a reference level on a one-dimensional variable. Well, I think if you look at people, their value system is very, very, very multidimensional, which means that you have much more flexibility in finding states that would be satisfactory, but that are very different.
Yeah, it was also what I said, these multiple paths. But I said that's pretty difficult to say what's like the goal of a person and what's like just a method to go there. And it's more difficult to model these kinds of things.
It's difficult to model this with traditional methods, but I think we should develop new methods to speak about what I call value systems, which are not goals that can be expressed with one or a few variables, but which are highly multidimensional, more kind of like fitness landscapes maybe, or it's not a trivial thing to do that, but I think that would make it much more realistic in the sense that people are much more adaptable in the sense that they have a goal at a certain moment and then they see something else and they're very much willing to forget their previous goal. And
but of course, and it's difficult to say like, okay, they're just adaptable or whether they're like manipulated. It's kind of difficult to say the difference between.
Well, yeah, but the manipulated aspect is somebody else may suggest the other goal and make it look attractive, but in the end, if the person is happy with it, why not? And also, if you just look around, you constantly change your mind. You first think, I want to go on vacation to Turkey, and then some friend told you how nice it was in Italy, and then you want to go to Italy, and then you see a brochure somewhere, and then you want to go to Greece. Yeah, what is your goal? You want to have some fun, but what is fun? It's a very vague value.
I would say it's pretty difficult to separate these normal influences.
Yeah, but it's not just a question of the influences, but the fact that you are very flexible and you're opportunistic. So while you are learning about your environment, you see goals that look attractive according to your general abstract value system, but that you had never considered before. So therefore, that's why I prefer, instead of calling goals, speaking about value system, but the value system is indeed something much more difficult to model. But then with your neural network models, if I understand it well, you have a kind of a base level that gives an input to each node, and that excitation of each node then propagates via the links, And then the question is whether you can reach the right activation state of each node, taking into account that the input has a certain value and that the links have a certain value. Is that it?
Yeah. So
And in the second stage, then the links can adapt so that even for a given input, the system might still reach the right
Yeah.
activation
Yeah.
level.
yes.
Yeah, that's one way to formulate it mathematically, but I'm also not convinced that it is very useful in practice. Because I mean, how do you see the connection between society and this kind of neural network model?
Well, it's a really simple model of how you can change your environment to reach control and to show a little bit that changing your environment might be like easier than trying to change the goals of other agents. And you also see it in society that you could try to control other people and could just
Yeah, but I don't understand quite in that neural network model, the nodes, do they represent the environment or do they represent individuals?
the node. I call the neighbors of a node its environment.
Mm-hmm. Ah, yeah.
So
So you mean that one node may be influenced via its neighbors?
Yeah.
Instead of directly controlling the node, you control the neighbors.
no, you control the instead of controlling your neighbors, you just choose which neighbors you interact with. So instead of, like you could say, like in a friendship, in a relationship, you just want your friends to be how you want them to be, or you just,
Yeah, that's what.
or you choose.
That was one
certain
of your
friends.
anarchist theories. I don't remember, not the anarcho-syndicalism, but the other one, I think,
The
where
insurrectionalism.
you find affinity
Yeah.
with people. Instead of trying to make other people like you, you
Yeah.
just find the people that are already like you and you forget about the others. Especially the avoid contact. it's a simple heuristic. It's a very effective heuristic if you want to avoid conflict. The easiest way is to avoid the people that you tend to get in conflict with.
Yeah. But it's like Peter Gelderloos devices, but I think it's a bit simplistic because the insurrectionalists I know, they're constantly on the street putting flyers to all kind of people, and well, the organizationists I know, they're more like in a subcultural setting.
Some
So
sort of contact is maintained.
so it's a bit simplistic.
Avoid contact, I can say a few things about it. That contact is not just to not speak with someone, but that there is no, if we have some antagonistic goals, we don't have to compete on some limited resource that is important to both of us. We can coexist in a manner that is in conflict, but this conflict does not come into some kind of mutually destructive policies.
It's also kind of the idea of the
And in the article, in the world of use, we try to argue that the condition of abundance, where everybody has everything that is needed for sustenance, minimal threshold of sustenance, even conflicting worldviews can live side by side and even interact in a manner that might cause some mutual fertility without this escalating into destructive behaviors of policies of one trying to exterminate the other because there is some mutual resource that if one has, the other cannot have. So
it's a question more of dividing up the resources so that there are no shared ones between the conflicting groups.
Yeah, sharing is needed when if you have a limited amount of energy, you have to share. But I'm not speaking about sharing. Is about everybody has enough of everything without even having
Yeah,
to.
okay. That's also the global
That's
brain solution. It's the abundance. If there is abundance of resources, there doesn't need to be any conflict about how you're going to use those resources.
So
And that
the-
was, sorry.
the avoid contact is maybe is a very simplistic way to say it, but it has some kind of depth that needs to. That I think it's worth exploring.
I just think about an example. I just was watching a kind of a documentary about one of those expedition type things they do, where they put a number of ordinary people and let them go through the jungle. And there were a group of 6 or so, but they had put them in teams of 2 because they had to do certain things together. Like for example, there was a canoe for 2 places, and there were 2 guys that really had very opposite characters. And from the beginning, they were arguing with each other, but they were both supposed to steer the same canoe. And the result was that the canoe didn't go anywhere, and that the others heard them arguing farther and farther away while the others were continuing. And so in the end, they decided to just change the teams and move the guys with different guys. But that's the avoiding contact strategy.
Yeah, the diversity of tactics is also a little bit based on that. So one example is like you might have people going in the street and they want to like attack capitalism immediately. So they might like attack banks or stuff like that. And often you have like people who don't want anything to do with it, and then there's a whole fight between those 2 camps, and maybe the other camp wants to more go to the politicians and all things like that, and the other group isn't agree with it. So there could be a fight, but if they just have something like, yeah, okay, let both groups do what they want, and these 2 tactics could actually reinforce each other and become like wonderful.
My general life philosophy is that the world is big enough, there are enough interesting things to do. You don't need to necessarily agree with the others about what should be done. Do your own thing, as long as you don't step other people on their toes.
Yeah, it's a simple principle.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes people are more busy with arguing why what other people are doing is wrong than doing what they want to do.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah, as soon as you have someone who's saying that what someone else is doing is wrong, you should probably be wary of them.
Well, of course, I think it's also good to like criticize each other so that you can learn and grow. And I mean,
This is only a problem when you have the same canoe and it happens.
It does happen in the sense, in the Swiss guys really need to sit in the same canoe. Well, then they can't avoid the conflict. But if there are several canoes and several people, they can redistribute them over different
Because then
canoes.
you have conflict. Otherwise, conflicting goals are really different goals, and you can go about them your way. And conflict is when you have something that you share together, and for your goal, should be used differently than for somebody else's goal.
Conflict is not only competition on resources, sometimes it's ideological, it's a worldview conflict. And I think that
But ideological conflicts are the kind of conflict that should not exist. The problem is with certain religions that they want to impose their religion on others.
yeah, this is already in application. It's a policy of how you manage the conflict, because if you're in conflict with someone, you can avoid contact. You can try to kill him or make him disappear. You can avoid contact in a more gentle manner, but there are a few policies that how you can manage a state of conflict. That we do not agree about certain aspects of how we see the world does not mean that we have immediately try to impose our beliefs on each other. We can just coexist and try to use the way that I think of it, that differences are a kind of a resource that we absolutely don't know how to use. Differences between humans, between ways of thinking, between ways of doing things, is a resource. It's a kind of it's a kind of resource that can be used in order to enrich the agents that are involved. I don't say it's simple, but
Differences should be celebrated.
But it can be done, I
Differences should be
mean,
celebrated and embraced.
the world of science is like that. You have different schools of thought and different
yes,
theories
yes,
that
it's
say
science.
opposite things, but they coexist. From time to time they have debates, sometimes they get resolved, most of the time they just keep their own view, but they live in peace, I mean, they're not really...
But are
Sometimes they
the-
find some synthesis also. It's,
But are these differences really used as resource? Because I think that when you have another school, theoretical school, how people react is like disliking it and just wanting to them to change their mind or something. So it's convince them to your point of view.
Yeah, but in theory, academics should have open debates, and they still exist as
I
open
think that
debates.
where you have differences, it means that the system is not in equilibrium. It means that there is some free energy that can move and change the system and drive it in different ways that are not predicted. Sometimes it can be destructive also, but a lot of time it's not destructive but constructive. So also now in the paper that we are working now, we try to use a kind of a philosophy that says that all sorts of cognitive development is always a result of some kind of a dissonance, of a difference or a gap, where you need to do something in order to accommodate a new situation or solve a problem or address a problem. So it's a kind of it's not always obvious, but it can be identified as a kind of a free energy in the context that the system exists.
Okay, so this urge to convince somebody is just this energy.
Yes,
running, right?
yes. Yes, in order to resolve a situation and reach a more stable system. So it's really a kind of a meta-stability that is driving a lot of social interactions and also political, economical, and also physical in this sense. A question about this diagram where you show that the one that you show that the links can be changed. Actually, what does this mean? That I'm going with those that fit me and I disconnect from those that.
Yes.
That's the. If I have to, I could not follow the mathematics, the notations especially. It's a little bit.
The notation of Mesarovic, sorry.
Yeah, it's difficult to accommodate in just a few minutes, but the understanding is that actually you take some information and you prefer to just exchange information with those units or agents that are fitting your initial direction of worldview and disconnecting from others. But if we take this to some kind of a limit, what will be the outcome? What do you think will be the outcome of such a process? It's a self-organization that creates some kind of cells, of closures.
Subcultures, you mean, that are separated?
Subcultures that are not interacting with each other.
Depends, of course, which are the agents you want to work with. It could be that you're not just choosing the neighbors which are similar to you, but you might think, he's criticizing my ideas, so it makes me think, so I'll organize. I mean, it kind of depends also on which is the heuristic an agent uses for how to connect.
But this reminds me of the model that Frank van Everwaller developed, what he called talking nuts, in which each agent is a neural network. These neural networks communicate with each other by passing on activations to equivalent nodes. But there are two rules for the interaction. That is that if one agent tends to send you messages that you disagree with, that are different from your own knowledge, you weaken your link to him. That means you will tend to take less account of his future links. So it's a kind of distrust, and vice versa. If he sends messages to you that kind of are compatible with what you already believe, you increase the trust in him so that the next time he sends you a message, it will have a higher influence. But there was also, and that was a little bit more counterintuitive, there was also an opposite rule, that if you send a message to the other guy and he doesn't accept it, you tend to increase the strength of your messaging to him because you try to convince him, you're kind of anticipating that because he didn't take into account your previous message, now you have to be extra forcefully in convincing
If
him.
you think that you are not being heard, you start to shout.
Yeah, and the good thing about model of Frank is that it seemed to very accurately reproduce a number of experiments in social psychology. These two rules apparently seem to capture quite a lot of the dynamics in groups. So it is to some degree realistic. On the one hand, you tend to pay less attention to those that tell you things that you have disagreed with in the past. On the other hand, if you have to talk to somebody that you know have disagreed with you in the past, you will try to be extra convincing.
Yeah, but
While if you
it
talk to
creates
somebody
sense.
that you know always agrees with you, you can just use a few words and you kind of assume that he will know.
It kind of creates anti-symmetrical relationships because if I
Yeah,
don't agree with you,
it's indeed
I try
asymmetrical.
to avoid
Yeah,
you
so,
while you try
so
to
the links between the agents are strong in the one direction and then and then weak in the other direction. It's indeed a counterintuitive feature, but it did seem to explain some of the dynamics that was observed in psychological experiments. You might want to read that paper.
might have read.
You may have read it a long time ago. Talking Nuts, it's called. I was co-author. Mhm.
Yeah, but this model is also kind of based on principle of neural networks and these kind of
Yeah.
principles.
Well, in this case, it was more kind of a cognitive model, like in how far would the neural networks come to agree, but in a sense, it's also kind of control in the sense that they want to convince the others. Can you go back to your first slide of the different anarchistic theories? Wait, this one, yeah, we saw that one, and then this one maybe. Yeah, here your idea is that power is not necessarily centralized in an individual or a group, but that it can be distributed. But power, what's the relation between power and control in your view?
It's kind of so an agent will feel like he is being controlled, but on the other hand, you can't really define like a body that is controlling.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of an agent is influenced to go in a way that he doesn't really want to go, but on the other hand, you can't really put something like that's the agent that has this goal. It may be.
Yeah, but I'm speaking specifically about power. If I remember well, in perceptual control theory, the power is the strength of the output signal and therefore the degree to which the agent can bring the perception close to its reference level. Because if you would have different agents that want to control the same reference level and the one is, let's say, twice as powerful as the other, the reference level will move, let's say, 1/3 the distance to the one's goal and 2/3 the distance of the other goal.
Individual power, we could say.
Hmm?
It's like the individual power.
That's like the individual power, but in this case we speak about power in a distributed manner. And
so
so I'm wondering whether you can also measure its that power.
I guess. So what? It's also about the idea of social power is also about perceptual control theory. So it's this idea. I think we could say social power is if you have like just all the individual powers together except for you. So that you have like
that it's just a kind of a sum of all the individual powers.
So you have
well, I know.
And then it's influenced by all these things.
Well, I know.
Maybe this one is 1/3 and this 2/3. better. So it's not just a sum because some.
Yeah. It's a weighted sum. Like you're influenced
Yeah.
by your father and by your teacher and by your friend, and your father is most powerful, and then your teacher and then your friend, but they all kind of influence you. But I know that Bill Powers, the creator of perceptual control theory, does not believe in society as a control system. He says his view is explicitly that it's all individuals. And that's one of the things where I disagreed with him. And in Principia Cybernetica, we had kind of a debate with him.
I might think that McLuhan also disagree with him because he really says like power is always like social. So he says you have all those agents trying to. So he says how agents could influence other agents, but really if you're like if there's like just one agent who tell you you should have a different reference. You can just like ignore it. While if you have like a whole group with like everybody ties it, you can't ignore it anymore. So that's basically his theory.
Well, that's usually called conformity pressure.
Yeah.
If the majority wants you to do something, it becomes very difficult to do something else, especially if that's a majority of 99%. But it would be interesting to be able to quantify that power. Because there are some models of conformity pressure, but the idea is simply that each individual has the same power and it's just the total amount that counts. Like, if 99% of the people you encounter all say the same thing, then you need a very strong self-autonomy to resist. While if only 40% say it, then you can more easily resist it. So
yeah, but kind of the perceptual control status. So you have like actually in general you have like different perceptions you want to control. Then you have like a hierarchy. So then you have like higher order things which adapt these reference values. And then it might be that there's like this perception, like if you have a whole environment which has a different reference value, if they would like all have the same reference value, then this one would be this reference value. So you would constantly be in conflict. There would be like a conflict here. Constantly that you can't reach your reference value, and then the higher order will change this reference value to 1. So there's kind of model that if there's a conflict, the system will get disturbed a little bit, and then it will reach this reference value, something like that. But I try to find clear models on how exactly these reference values are updated or something, but I couldn't really find it.
no, there's still a lot of work to do to model these kind of things.
And of course, you're still working with these reference values.
It's an interesting subject, but not trivial. So good luck for your PhD. I hope you can make something more coherent out of it. Can you go back to the slide with the power? So force coercion influence only works if social power is aligned to the same reference values. Paternalism and repression, two sides of same coin. Yeah, that's a bit also the discussion we were having with Marta, that society works with carrots and sticks, that it's not only punishing you if you deviate, but it's also attracting you by offering you rewards, and that's a capitalistic system precisely. It's constantly seducing people into doing things by offering them very nice looking things and say, if you buy this, you will be happy. And so, as long as they haven't bought it yet, they feel unhappy because of that.
Yeah, and that's also more difficult to criticize and say that he actually doesn't really want it. It's not really making him happy.
When you look at social systems, like as systems in the neighborhood, so other agents, so they want to be in control of their neighbors, human neighbors, right?
Yeah, but that's what I said. That's not because no. I don't think they want to be in control of their neighbors. They want to be in control of their life.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So
and it's not
they
necessarily
modify
the same.
behavior of human
Yeah.
neighbors.
So it's not. I don't think it's necessarily the same as trying to control their neighbors. So that's kind of what I was trying to say. That you could try to find the synergy so that you both have control of your life.
But I think in modern society, and that's one of the things that lots of people deplore about it, it's kind of fragmented in the sense that people live in their own little house or little apartment and they don't care at all about what their neighbors are doing and they just live their own little life, which has the advantage that it stops all these kind of conflicts. Your neighbors may be homosexuals or whatever. As long as they don't make too much noise, you don't care what they're doing in there. But so that's one approach, but on the other hand, it leads to a certain kind of apathy. So,
of course, there's a difference between acceptance and respect.
well, it's a difference between tolerance and being a community on friendly terms. You can tolerate things in the sense that you don't care.
But it's also a consequence of this, idea of choosing your neighbors. So really choosing your environment.
So
that they live just, behind the wall doesn't mean you consider them as your vital environment.
No, they are not really your.
Yeah.
In the social network, they are not your neighbors. They live behind the wall, but as long as the wall is thick enough that you don't hear what they are saying,
So
you don't care. Yeah, you're not connected.
Yeah, so it's not sure that this model of that choosing your neighbors is necessary always.
For one purpose it is, for increased control and satisfaction that goes with it. It changes a lot also.
But you say that control is everywhere on different interrelating facets. The question is in how far is that really control? As you say, the golden cage. Capitalism kind of entices you with lots of things, but you don't really have to take those things. You don't have to buy all the things you see in the publicity.
No, okay, but
most people do, but not everybody does.
I think control is more than coercion. There's a difference between control and coercion.
It's very difficult to make a distinction where control becomes a coercion, because every exchange of information can be considered as a kind of a control. If I tell you something, I'm controlling you in some way. If I tell you tomorrow it will be raining, I'm controlling the probability of you taking an umbrella tomorrow when you're there.
Well, it's the difference between influencing and controlling. I mean, lots of people can tell me lots of things and I may take them into account, but I make up my own mind at the end.
What is the difference?
Might be like if you're trying to if you want someone to behave as you want, something like that.
Well, one of the good things about powers is perceptual control theory is that he has a very explicit definition of control. You have a certain variable that you want to be at a certain reference level. The degree to which you succeed in making it move close to the reference level is your degree of control. In the case of this kind of influence we're speaking about, it's not obvious what is the reference level that the system is trying to push us towards. Maybe the general reference level is that the capitalist system wants you to spend money. But, yeah.
And these reference frames are also like emerged. They're not like someone really deciding I want this reference frame to exist. And,
No, but although Powers himself tends to think that perceptual control systems are necessarily living systems, to me his theory is perfectly applicable to these more abstract social systems like Luhmannian systems that also control the people in the sense that they have certain reference levels that they try to move people towards, and the reference level of the capitalist system is consumption. That means you should consume as much as possible.
Yeah, but
so that is a kind of a control.
Yeah, but because it's more abstract, it's more difficult to grasp for people.
Yeah, of course, that's why they don't see it.
Yeah, it's more difficult to see.
if you treat them as agents, it's really you can just apply the same rules that you apply to people. That they do it not in order to control, but in order to have control over their own existence, which is autocratic existence. So they have to have those resources. So and the control felt as imposing something on you. It's just side effect.
Well, the control as is felt on you probably would be something like my neighbors have bought a big flat screen TV, I still have a small TV, I need to have that TV, so I need to borrow money in order to afford it, because otherwise everybody will think that I'm a poor guy, and then you start to feel the control. It also depends on your psychology. Like, do you really want to have the same type of TV as your neighbors, or don't you care?
Or do you want to be friends with people who would think that of you? Like, do I want to be friends with someone who only likes me because I have this type of TV or this type of car? And that says something about how, how comfortable you are with yourself, or how much you're willing to change yourself for other people.
Yeah, and there I think we come again to the problem of self-actualization, the degree to which you feel independent, autonomous person yourself, is also the degree to which you will be able to resist these kind of pressures. If you feel yourself as a weak, fragile being, you don't want to alienate your friends and your neighbors and whatever. You want to do like everybody else.
And that's why I keep stressing the empowerment of the individual. Like, we have to make sure that people do feel that their lives and their experiences and their selves are worth something. You don't have to conform to what the group's doing. Your what you think, what you experience, what you like, what you want to do, those things are important. You don't have to just copy and follow.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as that in some way. But it seems to be at the same time a very powerful force in our society. At the same time, people want to conform.
Of course, it's also a social need that people want to have like friends. And
people want to have friends, yeah,
and
but
of course
it
it
just
also
depends on
kind
if it comes at the cost of yourself.
yeah, it also depends on which people you know and which friends you can have. Don't require for me to be conformist.
You know what I'm trying to get at, though. You know what I'm trying to get at, though. If you want to be friends with someone where it just develops organically, where you're not just, I'm not just pretending I like what you like so that you'll hang out with me.
Yes.
I know it's more nuanced than that, but that there is a real distinction here to be made. I think. I give the distinction with what you see with a lot of kids, where they see everyone's buying this type of card, or everyone's playing this type of game, or everyone's buying these types of clothes, and well, I've got to do that, right? And breaking out of that type of behavior is.
And this is interesting that children really have it. This willingness to do exactly the same, and then when they grow up, they don't. So not so much at least. So one could argue that the way our society operates really enables this individualization. So doesn't because it would be easier probably to keep them that way, right? And somehow they grow up. And they don't do that.
Yeah,
to that extent.
Maturation certainly plays a role in this.
Verburgh, who is one of the founders of the theory of happiness, a sociologist who has looked at all the conditions of happiness, his theory is that modernization has made people much more happy precisely because it has enabled this individualism, this freedom of not doing the same as your neighbors. If you all live in a small village, you don't really have the choice of what friends or what norms you follow, while if you live in a big city, You can choose your fun and you can follow your own goals much more easily.
Which is
But it has other.
On the other
It
hand,
has other-
individualism is often defined on what you consume. Like you're making you're defining your individual by just putting yourself into a subculture of buying certain things, and
Yeah.
I guess capitalism also likes to like build all kind of different niches that they can.
The more subcultures, the more products you
Yeah.
can make, and and the easier it is to make some kind of an exclusive product for which you can ask a lot of money.
But and then but adults, and going back to your point that it does seem to be that adults break out to some degree of this I don't know if it's how to say it, almost like but it's arbitrary conformity, like it's what clothes you're wearing or something like that. But then adults do like almost like a worse type of conformity in some ways. I'm talking about like talk about types of jobs that you're willing to consider as prestigious, or types of sexuality you're willing to engage, or types of social relationships, sexual or non-sexual, that you engage in. These types of conformity are very strong in adulthood, and we all have adults all do the same basic life history thing. They all engage in that same basic life history path. And you know what I'm saying? That is in some ways a more insidious type of conformity that people don't even think about.
So it might be just more sophisticated than children, but it is as strong.
In some ways stronger because it's not so obvious. Like it's and take for example the marriage thing. And I'm not pro or against marriage, but when you're growing up, adults will assume that's what you're going to do, and they'll keep asking you, when are you going to get married, or are you going to settle down soon? And it nonstop, for guys and girls. And you could make the case that it's worse for girls than guys, but it's still there for everyone. So it's almost like and you're weird or you're different if you don't go that path, or if you don't want to buy a house, or if you and all these other things. So I think that in some ways, people who get depressed in adulthood are people in some ways who see this path and they see everyone doing it, and then they feel isolated because I don't even know if that's the adulthood I want. So I think I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there. Is that there are types of conformity in adulthood that persist. From childhood. I don't know. It certainly is different than the type of conformity that we see in children. But in some ways, there's a certain freedom in childhood expression that goes in adulthood as well at the same time. I'm just thinking here about the types of things I did as a child. Whether it was games or painting or writing or whatever it was, there seemed to be like a creative freedom and expression, and without much structure, that certainly does seem to get squashed out as well, towards some sort of conformity.
Well, my feeling from my own daughter's experience is that it's suddenly, that conformity pressure suddenly kind of emerged in middle school, or in the primary school it wasn't really there. But it's around puberty that they somehow feel this need to create in groups that have certain norms.
Yeah, I think choosing their identity at first, they try to confirm general thing, and then they're creating subcultures.
I'm encouraged about my mom works in a kindergarten and primary school, and I'm encouraged by some of the things that she's saying are being implemented, where they're doing child-directed learning, where it's less moving away from right now schools on this industrial assembly line type of thing, where everyone goes to the same type of school all the way throughout, and they're trying to move more towards, well, what's the kid interested in, and letting the child follow that interest and see where it leads type of thing, where it's like that you could have two different kids in the same classroom, but they go radically different paths. One kid's really interested in numbers, the other kid's really interested in storytelling, and one kid's really interested in painting, and they all go in different directions. And it's not like, okay, you guys all like really different things, but we're going to fit you into this same class routine for the rest of the next 20 years or however. And I think that's an interesting way to go. I think you'll get a lot of interesting type of super talented people in different directions. And you might get a lot more engagement with the school system. Because there are a lot of people that go through, and it's almost like a cliche to say this type of student, but the student is smart, but is just not interested at all in being in school and ends up not even engaging with the system at all. So how do we get those types of people to stay engaged in society? And I think, again, empowering the individual is the answer to it. I don't know, I'm right.
You're pretty quiet up to now.
I was just thinking, taking in what people were saying. But again, I come back to like simple examples. And my brother sticks out as one of these sort of archetypal cliches of a smart guy who was really engaged up till middle school, like around this time you're saying, like liked school, but then just completely fell off. And he's like, I am out of this. I don't want anything to do with this. And he's still the same way. I don't want anything to do with this society. And so I gave him a book by Henry David Thoreau, who just went off into the cabin by himself. It's like, hey, this is your guy. This is your guy.
Why does he have to have?
Yeah, go build a cabin. Or go buy a tiny house. I don't know, but